Welcome to my podcast. This is the Plan It Your Way show, where I turn business planning into a fun, jargon-free adventure. I'm Claire Pickens, and I'm the owner of Clarity Group, LLC. The goal of this podcast is to make business planning approachable and enjoyable. And don't worry, I'm not here to bury you in buzzwords like synergy or scalability. This is a safe zone. By the end of this series, you'll have a business plan that fits your style and feels more like a roadmap than a homework assignment. What you can expect from this episode: we're going to talk about market share and the actual math that relates to that. We're going to define what market share is. This is part of your market analysis section of your business plan. And we're going to do some reality checks on how to check your math and find some of the data relative to figuring out what your market share actually is. And we're also going to talk about some of the common mistakes that are made in this particular section. Yes, I know. I say this is a jargon-free zone. However, when you're writing your business plan, the people that are asking for the information might be using some terminology that's unfamiliar. So you might hear people ask for something called a feasibility study, or they might say, do you understand the share of the wallet that you have in your area? Do you understand the transactions available in your area? Do you understand the slice of the pie that you have of your local area? All of those are the same way of saying how much business is available for your business in the area. That is essentially what you're calculating here in market share, is what's available out there. And does that mean that you'll have a viable business just based upon some basic information about your area? For the purpose of today's example, we're going to talk about a pet boarding facility, and we're going to make an audacious statement to kick this off. We're going to say you could capture just 6% of your local market and generate over $1 million in revenue annually. Let's go through the math, starting at the beginning. So why do lenders care about this? They care about it because they want to know that there's just enough available in your area to make it a viable business so that you can repay your loan. And they want to know that you can grow as well. They don't want people opening businesses that are immediately stagnant. They also don't want to have a business open where if just one more of that business opens in the area, it creates a disaster for all the businesses in the area. So you're not just looking for just enough business to get by. You're actually looking for enough business to open and grow through this exercise. And you don't want to say something crazy like, well, I just know every dog owner is going to want to use my services. And I just absolutely know all of my friends and family will want to also. So, I just need to turn the lights on and open the door, and I'm just going to have all of the share because they're going to leave all these other businesses and come to mine. That would be a pretty big mistake because, spoiler alert, that actually doesn't happen in real life. We need to find your market size, and this is going to require a bit of detective work. First, let's start with pet ownership. Since we're using the example of a pet boarding business, we need to find out how many dogs are in the area, how many pet owning households are in the area. A little bit later, I'm going to tell you where you can potentially find some of this information, but let's just start with some generalized math so that you can understand how this breaks down. First, we're going to say that the population in your service area, which is generally within 5 to 10 miles of your business, you'll want to identify specific zip codes. Let's just say that population is 200,000 people. And we're going to say that the average household size is 2.5 people. So that means there's about 80,000 households in your market. And we're going to say that we've found out that 38% of the households own dogs in your area. So we'll take that 80,000 households times 38%, And that means that approximately 30,400 households own a dog. And then we also, with our detective hat on, found out that there's about 1.6 dogs per household. So that means we're dealing with, in your market area, about 48,700 dogs. That's a lot of dogs, right? So now we need to find out, how do they spend money on these dogs? Like, every area is a little different here. There's some national statistics, but there's also some local statistics. And this is where you want to find out what your other businesses of like type in your area are charging. To keep the numbers round, we're just going to use some general numbers here. We found out that the average boarding in your area is $50 a night. And we did a little digging and found out that people use boarding about 10 nights per year, per dog, right? So rough math, here's where we're starting. Local boarding market, we know we have about 48,700 dogs, and maybe those dogs spend 10 nights at a boarding facility, and they spend $50 a night. So that's 48,700 times 10 times 50. We're now estimating the market value to be somewhere around $24.35 million annually. Sounds great, right? Where did I find all this data? I found it through a couple of different places. The APPA, American Pet Products Association, some census data, local vet offices, the local pet serving businesses are often a rich source of this data, and maybe some Rover or WAG market research. You're going to have to do a little bit of digging to find some of this information, and you're going to need to look for some consistency across the information to make sure that the numbers you're using are pretty valid. I think that I just assumed that all 48,000 dogs used boarding services, and that would be a mistake. When you're estimating market share, you need to do a little research also on about what percentage of the available market actually uses that type of service, because not 100% of the people use the service. So let's say in our detective work, we found out that about 65% use this type of service. So now we had 48,700 dogs. Now we have, at 65%, we have 31,655 dogs. That's still a lot of dogs. Nothing to be upset about here. And we're going to assume the same 10 nights at the same $50 a night. And now our estimated market size is actually 15.8 million, not the 24.35 million we came up with before. So I'm sure you can see how a bank would really respect this type of math, because it would show that you are really aware of about how many of the available type of customer in the area is likely to use the service, and generally how much they're spending on that service, and about how big the market is available for you to be a part of. So let's go a little deeper into the math, and we're going to make this as easy as possible. So we just identified that your market size is approximately $15.8 million. And maybe you do or don't know about how big your facility will be at this point, but we're just going to use some example math to keep things simple here. So let's say you have identified that you're going to have 75 kennels in your facility. And again, remember I said you never want to forecast or assume anything at 100%. In fact, I'm going to use 75% as the example to keep the math easy here. But you'll find when you see forecasts in different industries, sometimes it's even forecasted lower than that. And that depends on where you are a lot of the times. For example, if you have seasons of the year that heavily impact your business, maybe you're in an area where there's snowbirds and the population dramatically drops for a portion of the year. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you're somewhere where the weather dramatically drops the usage of that type of service for a portion of the year. whatever it is, you want to make sure that whatever percentage you're using matches what happens in your area from, vacations, seasonality, weather, whatever that might be. So for this example, we're going to say you have 75 kennels at a 75% occupancy average. So that's 75 times 0.75 times the 365 days a year. And that's assuming you're going to provide boarding all of those nights of the year. If your business is not going to be open 365 days a year, definitely don't multiply times 365 because that wouldn't be the right number. You need to multiply times the open days of the year for this estimation. So that means you have the potential of 20,531 dog nights annually at your facility. And at $50 a night, that is $1,026,550. So you see how we got there? We took 75 kennels, 75% occupied, times the number of days we're open in the year, which in this case is 365. That gave us the total number of dog nights available at the facility at the same $50 a night that we used for the area. That's about $1 million in revenue. All right, so now let's get our market share calculation. We're going to take this $1 million in revenue, 1.03 to be exact, and we're going to divide it by the 15.8 million, which we said was our adjusted realistic market value size in our area. And that's going to give us 6.5%. So remember at the beginning, I said you could own 6% of this market and still make over $1 million in revenue. Well, that's how we just proved that. And the sweet spot here is to only really need to have about 5 to 8% of the market share. That means there's plenty of room for growth in the area. That means that you could add on to your facility. Other facilities of this same type could open and it's not going to endanger your business. This means maybe you can open another location in the area if you want to expand and have other locations in the future. And it also means if the economy kind of takes a dip and everybody gets a little bit less of the market share, that you still, there's a buffer zone where maybe you get to capture more of the dogs that aren't currently using this service. Maybe you can entice them to start using the service and expand the size of the market in this area. I'm going to do a breakdown of this math at the end, so don't worry if you didn't write that down. We're going to run through it all together so that you have it in one place. But if you've not grabbed a notebook yet, please do, because this math is really important to your business plan, and it's something that you should understand when you are finding out if there's enough space for your business in the area. What's a good way to get better at this particular skill? Well, I feel that it is actually escaping from your own industry and doing this research and doing this math for other industries in other areas, not your own fishbowl, as I like to call it, but get out of your fishbowl and go to a different area of the country. Pull up random data for a zip code that's, 5 states away from where you are right now. And maybe you don't look at a dog boarding facility. Maybe you look at a restaurant and you do some detective work and throw those numbers around for the average market size and how often a customer uses that type of service. And maybe you find out how to discover if a market is what they call saturated, which means there's not really any more room for growth. In fact, each new business that opens of the same type in that area could actually cause damage to every business in that area because there's just too many for the consumer to choose from, or worse, the consumer could kind of get bored of that offering because there's just too many of them. So do this for yoga studios, lawn care service, and you're using the same universal principle. Population times usage rate times average spend, that's your total market. And then you're going to adjust it for the number of households that actually use that kind of service. The data does get tricky sometimes, though, and here's how. First, no perfect data exists. You're making educated estimates in some cases. In fact, I think that you'll find that if you're in major metro areas where there's a lot of analysis being done, you're likely to find more data, better data. If you're in an area where there's just not as much data available, you're going to have to make some educated guesses, and you might have to get a little bit more of that local level subjective data and just make your own estimates. There's also the competitor intelligence factor here, and maybe the price ranges are just all over the place. So I used $50 as an example, but you might just have a crazy variety in your area. You might have somebody at 25 and another one at 125. So you're going to need to make an educated guess on where the middle ground is, and make an average for your area that makes sense, that ties all of that information together. Or maybe you do a few different calculations and you blend them together to get your final answer. The seasonal adjustments I have mentioned, those can be a little tricky when you're analyzing this data. And your service area reality. So I mentioned 5 to 10 miles. That's a pretty common service area, but that's not the right service area for every business. And let me give you an example. If you're in a very rural area where people are used to driving far, maybe the properties are really far apart, then you might want to extend that to 20 miles. That might be normal for your area for people to drive 20 miles to get your type of service. On the flip side of that, you might live in a major metro area where people will only use certain freeways and it's a little bit more saturated and a little bit more dense. So 10 miles might be way too far. 10 miles in some of the cities in this country could take somebody an hour to drive. So that would not be realistic. You want to set your area at what's realistic for your particular geography. And sometimes that's traffic patterns. Sometimes that's population density. Sometimes that's just the normal for your area for drive time. The bank can help you a little bit with what they consider a competitive area for your geography, but also you're the expert in this. You should drive your area and ask the businesses how far away their customers come from, and not just your same business type, other business types, just to see like what's normal in my area for how far customers are willing to travel. And that will really help you set your geography right so that when you're pulling these population numbers and households, you have a little bit more of a realistic idea of what's available. You'll want to avoid some common mistakes, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I want to expand upon it. The every pet owner will use us fallacy. Nope. Maybe max 65%, but not every one of them. And that's because first, not everybody in the category likes to use a particular type of service, but also I mentioned friends and family might not even use you, and that's a reality you're going to have to accept as a small business owner. And that's because people already have some established business relationships, and those should be respected. They might already trust and really enjoy the service that they're using now. And it's not necessarily an insult to you that they might not use your service, but it might just mean they're happy with where they are now, and you might actually be able to learn from that. So don't assume in your math that everybody's going to come flocking to your service, because you have to earn that trust within your community. Also, let's not ignore the competition. Their facilities are already there, and even if they're not as nice as a brand new facility or a brand new brand and business, they do have an established relationship with the community, and they have built that trust already. So don't underestimate them and assume that you're going to steal their customers from them. Also, don't underestimate your potential. A well-located facility can actually achieve a higher market share. I wouldn't necessarily recommend writing that right into your forecast or to your business plan, but for an example, you might find as you drive around your local area that it's a whole bunch of left turns to get into some of your competition, but that your located in a way that people can easily get into your parking lot and easily use your services, and maybe your parking lot's even a little safer feeling, that's going to help you. The flow within your building might be better. There might be certain acoustics that might be better in your building. Whatever those things are, don't underestimate your potential. And also your geographic over or under reach. So if you're building a small facility, you'll want to be very careful about how far you go with this geography and your competitive area. If you're building a gigantic facility that can serve a lot of people and potentially a lot of pets, then you might have a larger geographic reach, and you should find out. And like I said earlier, find out how far people are willing to drive for certain things. And if you have a unique thing, it's possible they're willing to drive a little bit farther for it. Okay, let's wrap this up. First, do your homework. Look at your local population. Find out the zip codes that even matter for your business and how far that reaches. Households that use your service, individual users of your service. And in this case, we used a pet boarding facility, so it's actual dogs. That's what you're looking for. And you need to do some validation here. You are in this market, and even if you're working with a planner, it is up to you to drive around your local market and really look into your competition's capacity to serve, and if that impacts how this is calculated. There's also the reality check of what you're really looking for here is not to own 100% of your market or even 50% of your market. A really healthy percentage to own of your market is the 6 to 8% range, so that you know that you've got a lot of room for growth. And you'll want to validate your opportunity through doing all of the math. And I said I would walk through all of the math again. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So we found out that our local area had about 200,000 people. The average household size was 2.5 people per household. So that means from those 200,000 people, we now have 80,000 households. We found out the pet ownership rate was about 38%. So that means of those 80,000 households, there's about 30,400 that are dog owning households. We found out that in our area, the average dogs per household is 1.6. So that means there's approximately 48,700 dogs in the area. Then we also found out the average cost for boarding in the area was $50, and that the average nights stayed in a boarding facility were around 10. So that meant that our full market value was local boarding market of 48,700 dogs times 10 nights times $50, which gave us $24.35 million annually. Then we applied reality to this, and we found out that only about 65% use boarding services. So now we've adjusted our market size down to 31,655 dogs at the same 10 nights, at the same $50, and now we've discovered 15.8 million is actually the more realistic market value in our area. Then we brought that over to our facility, and we decided we were going to open a facility with 75 kennels, and we would be occupied about 75% of the time. So we took that 75 times 75%, and we're going to be open 365 days a year, which gave us 20,531 nights of occupied dog nights annually. At $50 per night, that was about $1.03 million. We then took that $1.03 million, divided it by the market size of $15.8 million, and we achieved a 6.5% market share. Okay, so I hope that helped you understand how to calculate your market share and how to think about your market share. This is a really important part of business planning, and it's an important part of really understanding the value of growth in your area within your industry type. If you don't totally understand how to do this, that's really not a big deal. There are plenty of planners out there that can help you understand this math. What is important is that you understand the viability of your type of business in your area and that you put some realistic numbers behind that. Thank you for joining me today as we dive into the many concepts that are important to consider in your business planning journey. Subscribe to this channel on your favorite streaming service to hear my latest episodes. Want to learn more about business planning or my services? Visit my website at smallbusiness-dreams.com or find me on LinkedIn, Claire Pickens. I even have t-shirts to match some of the fun themes I talk about on these podcasts, so go check them out and get yours today.